Good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor.
The world continues to get more interesting week by week, and seems to me that what we've been saying about the increasing difficulty of anybody to maintain authority seems to be on course.
Yes. In
It's,
which particular region?
well, it's difficult to choose,
Yeah.
but I mean the any part of the world you look at,
Mhm,
there's some authority problem, but obviously the biggest ones are Egypt, Syria, and Ukraine.
mhm.
And Ukraine is perhaps the most interesting and most puzzling one because nobody's quite sure what the odds are on any particular solution
Mhm.
or what Putin thinks he can possibly do. I just saw a new announcement that a Russian spy ship has just docked in Havana.
Oh, really? I did not see that.
Well, it was just a minute ago. I just thought
All
I'd
right.
letters before you called.
Interesting.
Obviously Putin is up to all sorts of things, and we've no idea what. But I think that he's playing an old game, and he doesn't realize that the rules are changing, and it's not going to be possible to do things in quite the old way that he was so good at as the head of KGB.
Right, right. I
Uh,
I I think he's probably suffering from some sort of afterglow from the Olympics because I'll tell you, I would have bet the mortgage that there would have been some sort of terrorist incident in Sochi. And I mean, you got to hand it to them. Whatever they did with their ring of steel or security cordon or whatever it's being referred to, the fact that nothing happened was absolutely astonishing to me.
well, certainly, I wonder what we will hear later about the way they made sure about it.
Yes.
Of course, there's been a lot of things going on in relation to Ukraine, which have taken away a lot of the headlines. In
Mm,
fact, I think the Olympics got less attention because of what was going on in Ukraine.
right, right. And I think what went on in Ukraine really was actually very seminal. I mean, obviously, the Ukraine has been dare I say, at times a vassal state of Russia for many generations, even though the Western Ukrainians would vehemently dispute that. And for this to have happened right there on their doorstep, and with the fortuitous chance that the EU foreign ministers happened to be in town and kept Yanukovych in the room for like 20 hours in a row until they negotiated a settlement. And then he mysteriously disappeared. I was amazed at all that.
Well, I my thinking about it begins with the fact that Russia began in Kiev.
Yes, it did. That's right. The Kievan princess,
I
correct.
never quite understood, and the word Ukraine, if I understand correctly, means on the edge.
Okay.
Um, so I'm really not sure what the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, how it should be interpreted historically, because obviously anything we think about it now is somewhat distorted by what Stalin did with it.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
why Stalin made it a separate state within the Union, I don't know, but I'm sure when he did it, he wasn't thinking of it as a separate country.
Hmm. No.
And I'm also not sure what the relationship should be between Ukraine and Crimea. And currently, I understand there are two, Sevastopol, I think it's Sevastopol in the Crimea, is the only port in the world that is the home of two national fleets.
Oh, that's right. The Russian National Fleet and the Ukraine National
Yeah,
Fleet.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
remember, I suppose it must be 20 years ago now, that there was a big to-do between Russia and Ukraine about what was going to happen to the Russian
Hmm.
fleet in Crimea.
Well, so we have people like Putin who are standing up to, if you will, broadly categorized as the forces of globalization. And then you have to also, God forbid, say I say this, take your hat off to President Assad, who was also standing up against forces of globalization, which again, thankfully I don't bet, because had I bet on his tenure a year ago, I would have thought his goose was cooked. But there he is.
Well, it's really quite surprising because I didn't think he was capable of managing things in the way that he appears to be managing things.
Hmm.
Of course, we don't really know whether he's the person who's doing the managing or not, or whether he's the figurehead for a group of people who know how to manage things.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the situation in Syria gets, from any sort of humanitarian point of view, seems to get worse and worse. But at the same time, Assad's hold on things seems to get more and more sure.
Hmm. Yes.
It's be more and more difficult to do anything about it because the talks in Geneva were, as far as I can see, a total failure. And I'm not sure that, well, we haven't seen anything in the press about any plans for the next.
No, no, everything is pretty quiet there.
You
There was an article on the front page of the New York Times the day before yesterday that tipped the card, so to speak, as to what the American cyber attack plan might be against the Syrians. And apparently President Obama is reluctant to implement it because there's some anonymous quotes included in the article said what it would effectively do is take Assad out. It would reduce the country to a state where there was no electricity grid, no communications grid, no water functioning, no water meter, no gas lines, nothing. It would essentially shut it down completely. And Obama is reluctant to do this, presumably for fear of what the Russian reaction would be.
I didn't see that statement, but I know that from very early on, Obama has been, from what I've read, very firm about not getting involved in any sort of war in Syria.
Even a cyber war.
Yeah, yeah, because he wants to have a different legacy from his predecessor,
Hmm.
and he wants his legacy to have stopped America
Right.
invading other countries. So he's in a very difficult position because Kerry is, what should I say, a very active Secretary of State. And I think that there was a very interesting article in I think it's the Current Atlantic,
Okay.
Kerry, a long article about his relationship with Obama.
What does it say? Is it a close relationship or?
It's a very close relationship, apparently, and
Okay.
apparently Kerry was a very close supporter of Obama before he became president.
Okay.
And even though he wasn't Obama's first choice for foreign secretary, they seem to get along very well, but still there's some tension every now and then about
Mm.
what Kerry can do and
Right.
what the White House is going to do.
Right. Right.
But the mixture of ingredients to the Syrian thing with Hezbollah and Netanyahu and the Palestinians and Iran is so complicated that it's difficult to see how Kerry can continue to have something to do with each of the parties without having a general policy for solving the problem. But there doesn't seem to be any general policy, at least not now that the Geneva talks have
Right. Right.
failed.
What did you think of President Obama essentially throwing his hands up and walking away from Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan?
Well, I haven't really understood from the beginning why the U.S. is putting so much effort into trying to get Karzai to sign an agreement about what will happen after the election that terminates his tenure in office.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem to me to be the fair democratic thing to do.
You just stick it to your successor.
Yeah, and that's maybe what Karzai is intending to do, but he may have other motives as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows what he thinks he's going to do with his life after he ceases to be president.
Right.
But he's got to be very careful about his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's seen as terminating his finishing his term by handing his country over to the Americans,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
that may not be a good way to finish.
No, to put it mildly.
And again, the situation between Afghanistan and Pakistan Karzai and Nawaz Sharif is very complicated. We don't really know what's going on with Iran, between Iran and Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
Iran and Afghanistan, Iran helped America in Afghanistan to begin with.
Mm-hmm. It did, right.
And I find it difficult to believe that Iran is not involved in any way in what is going on there now.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, there is a significant Shia minority in Afghanistan, and Iran is always concerned to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I noticed also, I wanted your comment on this, there were a couple of stories this week that have been backed up by military force. The Pakistanis have apparently decided and publicly said that they are going to go after and eradicate the Taliban operating in their own country. And this had been something they had always pulled their punches on, I think, for fear of being distracted from the primary enemy, India.
It's interesting, and I wonder where that motivation comes from. And I mean, one of the things that's going on in Pakistan that we don't hear much about, but I'm sure is a very important factor in the current situation, is the struggle for supreme authority between Nawaz Sharif and the army.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Especially because of the fact that Parvez Musharraf in 1999 terminated Nawaz Sharif's second term as prime minister.
Right. Some bad blood, to say the least.
And and Nawaz Sharif went into exile for a while.
Yeah.
Now Nawaz Sharif is back, and I'm surprised that was really surprised when Musharraf decided he'd go back to Pakistan to compete with Nawaz Sharif for an election.
The height of hubris.
It may be hubris. I'm not sure, but he's dropped out of the headlines. Musharraf, and the big problem between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and to some extent the big problem for the Americans as well, is the federally administered tribal areas.
Yes, yes.
And there was the BBC yesterday had a very good program interviewing a man from the tribal areas whose brother and son had been killed by a drone attack. They had nothing to do with any terrorist organization. They were in fact employees of the Pakistan government. And in all the family affairs after the attack, which are normal, and all the discussion about what could be done about this sort of thing, he was encouraged to sue the CIA and the government. And he got a Pakistani lawyer to do this for him. And now he's touring Europe seeking support.
Good for him.
Now, this is
that's globalization.
This is not something that would have happened before this current stage of globalization, I don't
No, not at all.
No. So there may be a new problem for Obama to deal with.
Yes.
But the federally administered tribal areas really are becoming more and more difficult to deal with, and you know that they're pretty much the main part. Well, the northern part of the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan is the old pagan population, who the Taliban now say that they will convert by force. And then there's the tribal areas that extend down to Baluchistan.
Okay.
Which are, I forget now how many there are, 6 of them, I think, and they're not controlled by the government, at least haven't been formally controlled by them. And then you get into Baluchistan, which is 43% of the territory of the country, which is more or less at civil war with Pakistan.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
It doesn't get into the news very much either.
No, that does not. The only thing you ever read about Baluchistan is that port the Chinese are building.
And we haven't heard much about that recently.
No, we haven't.
I wonder whether the Chinese are still hoping to have a road from Western China down through from Kashgar
Mm.
through the northern areas down to Gwadar, so they can use that port. But we haven't heard anything about that recently. But
No.
the Baluch really resent that, the government giving that port to the Chinese.
Oh, they do.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I had thought that they looked upon it as a source of local revenue, but I'm mistaken.
Well, there at the moment it's set up in such a way that they don't get anything from it at all.
Oh, well, okay. So it definitely did come
And
from Rawalpindi.
you know that port belonged to Oman until 1958,
Okay, I did
when
not know that.
Pakistan bought it from Oman for I think £2 million.
Okay.
So it has a strange history.
Mm,
It was one of several ports on the Arabian Sea and the
mm.
Persian Gulf, which were part of the Muscadine Maritime Empire in the 19th century, which of course was supported by the British.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, in the Indian Ocean was, I think, the cradle of globalization, because that's where interaction between so many different countries from India around to East Africa and even actually as far southeast as Indonesia
Mhm.
began to intensify earlier than in any other part of the world.
Oh, even China, those
Yeah,
2,000 men Chinese vessels
South China Sea as well.
were visiting on the east coast of Africa many
Uh,
times.
and now it's the countries around that sea that are becoming a focus of attention.
Well, they're becoming a focus of attention in insurance too, because these areas represent supposedly $1 trillion of new annual insurance and reinsurance premiums each year. The only difficulty is that underwriting information about the characteristics of the risks to be insured is not known. So there's a big data problem in how to retrieve that information so underwriters can evaluate it properly and assess a premium level that will make some money.
But India is supposed to be the home of big data.
Good luck with that. Um, so,
Okay,
all
well,
right, Professor, thank you. I will give your regards to London and we'll speak again in 2 weeks.
okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.